I'm sending you out 2 by 2, proclaiming as you go, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Heal the sick, cast out demons.
I've been reading a lot of the writings of Dietrich von Hildebrand. Maybe not a household name, but one of the most important Catholic philosophers of the last century. Very influential on both John Paul II and Benedict XVI, von Hildebrand was, in the 1930s, identified by the Nazis themselves as their #1 enemy. Pretty high praise, that.
Outlines of the life of Dietrich von Hildebrand, but let me, in just a few minutes, which is almost impossible, in broad strokes, give you a portrait of the man. Now, Helmut Kohl, the great former chancellor of Germany, once said something about von Hildebrand that has always stayed with me as especially profound. He said that Dietrich von Hildebrand was a witness from a dark era in German history. And this gets at something in a way deeper than all the other things that one can say about von Hildebrand. And the reason is this: von Hildebrand saw the truth of Nazism precisely at a moment when no one else did. Today, we can comfortably and easily condemn it because it's become evident. But there was a moment, particularly the moment when von Hildebrand spoke, when the truth was somehow completely clouded. There was a moral fog. But then on top of it, it wasn't just the intellectual accomplishment, and here we get to witness. It was the fact that he gave testimony to this truth. He raised his voice and he stepped forward courageously into the public square. And I think that that's the great service of the moral witness, to stand for truth no matter the cost, and especially at moments when that truth is simply not seen by most people. Now, superficially, there's a way of reading the life of von Hildebrand where one doesn't see the enemy #1 of the Nazis coming. I mean, after all, he was the son of a nobleman and a great artist, Adolf von Hildebrand. Dietrich von Hildebrand was a philosopher and a professor, and he was a man of culture. But a deeper look, and this is what I want to leave you with by way of introduction, shows that he was in fact predestined to oppose the Nazis. So let me do this. There's just no way I can do justice to this. You just have to forgive me. I'll do this quickly. So, by way of biography, he was born in Florence of German parents in 1889. He was the son, as I mentioned, of the eminent sculptor Adolf von Hildebrand. Now, as a boy, young Dietrich, as a teenager, fell in love with philosophy through his reading of the dialogues of Plato. Now, what captivated him wasn't necessarily the element of argument and debate. It was the fact that in Plato, the question of truth had absolute primacy. And it wasn't truth in an academic sense. It was truth as a question to be lived. It was the question of truth that could give meaning and purpose to life. So von Hildebrand discovered his vocation through the reading of Plato, and then he went on to study with some of Germany's leading minds, and he became a star student of no less than philosophers like Edmund Husserl and Max Scheler. And he went on to become a major philosophical force in the years following the end of the First World War. The great Newman scholar Louis Bouillet said that Dietrich von Hildebrand was the most important Catholic philosopher between the 2 world wars. Now, something that I think all of you know here, but occasionally people don't know, is that Dietrich von Hildebrand was a convert to Christianity, to Catholicism. He'd been raised in a nominally Christian home, but the family was completely non-practicing, and the family religion was really the religion of art and of beauty. But this wasn't quite as superficial as it might sound. There was something very deep there. There was a spirit of reverence before all great things, and he inherited that reverence, and this turned out to be the gateway for faith. And it's interesting, he was drawn to Christianity, not by doctrine or history. He didn't read himself into the church like a John Henry Newman, for example. He was drawn by the beauty that he found in the Christian saints. There was something that captivated his heart and mesmerized him, and then brought him very rapidly into the Catholic Church. Now, the reason I want to emphasize this is not just to highlight Van Hildebrand, the man of faith, which is of course important, but because I myself made the mistake when I began thinking and reading Van Hildebrand about 10 years ago when I began the work of translating this book, to think of him primarily as a man of clarity and a man of courage. I saw the element of faith as important, but not as essential as it really is. But then I immersed myself in his memoirs, and I read the description of his conversion and the before and the after, and I realized that he is totally incomprehensible without his faith. And what became even more clear was that it was this lived faith that was unquestionably the source of his freedom of spirit, of his heightened sense for good and evil, which of course was his great contribution, and of his absolute trust in divine providence. And I'll share that with you briefly in just a moment. Now, in 1919, he was just 30 years old, and he took a position in Munich, at the University of Munich, teaching philosophy of religion. And from there, what is particularly significant is that being in Munich, he had a kind of front row seat for the rising Nazi movement. So the Nazi movement in 1919 was if anything, quite inchoate. The party hadn't even been formed, but he was there to see it unfold. In fact, all of his colleagues at the University of Munich were very infected by this German nationalism, which the Nazis were to exploit. I feel reasonably safe making this claim, though someone out there might contest it, but I think one can say that Dietrich von Hildebrand was quite possibly the first German Catholic of stature to grasp the essence of Nazism and to denounce it uncompromisingly. This goes back to 1921. I mean, in 1921, there was barely anything really to denounce. But the Nazis blacklisted him in 1921 for statements he made against nationalism and against anti-Semitism. In 1923, bear in mind that's 10 years before Hitler becomes chancellor, Van Hildebrand had to flee for his life when Hitler briefly seized power in this so-called beer hall putsch, which took all of about 24 or 48 hours, but in that moment he had to escape Bavaria, where he lived. What's quite dramatic is to see the aftermath of Hitler's appointment as chancellor in January of 1933. Van Hildebrand began to wrestle with the demands of conscience. He realized increasingly it would not be possible to speak openly against National Socialism without risking the concentration camp. And there were considerations of safety, but it's very important to emphasize it was always a matter of conscience. He could have quieted himself. He could have gone into the underground. He could have participated in this movement of the inner resistance, as it was called. So the question for him was, could he stay? And his answer was no. As a Christian and as a philosopher, he felt an obligation to speak out, to be a witness. And so in this respect, he had a very distinct calling from, say, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who we'll hear about tonight, who felt a calling to be active within Germany. So Van Hildebrand chose to risk everything to follow his conscience. And in March of 1933, he and his wife abandoned a magnificent home in Munich, a villa really, that they had inherited from his father. They abandoned their family and their friends and his circle of students, which was so important to him. And to what end? This is so important because the biographies give you the impression that he knew what he was doing. Well, he had no idea where he was going. He was going into the blackness of the unknown, but it was his faith that sustained him. And he says something so beautiful in his memoirs, and I'll quote this for you. He says, "I think I can honestly say that I would have left Germany even without any of the perils I confronted. But I had the conviction that my decision to leave was right before God, and thus, despite all of the uncertainty of my future livelihood, I felt myself completely secure in the love of God." And he quotes Abraham then, "Deus providebit," God will provide. And the months ahead were very trying for him. He went to the home of his birth in Florence, and he spent 6 months there discerning his future. He didn't know what he would do, but he knew he wanted to be of service in the cause against Nazism. And his sixth sense for Nazism put him in a very isolated position. His friends didn't grasp what was coming. They perceived him as overreacting, or they were absorbed in their ordinary daily affairs, and so they couldn't even enter into his worry. And so it was a terrible time of isolation. But in Florence, he began to take note of something very important taking place in Austria. And that was that there was a young Austrian chancellor by the name of Engelbert Dollfuss, who was the only European head of state at that time who had an openly anti-Nazi policy. And Van Hildebrand was struck by that and impressed by that. And so he attempted to meet with Dollfuss. It took several attempts, which was quite humbling for Van Hildebrand. And finally, he was able to meet him, and he presented to Dollfuss this idea. He said, "I want to be an intellectual officer in the battle against National Socialism." And he presented the idea of establishing an anti-Nazi, anti-communist, anti-racist newspaper, a weekly paper, And Dollfuss agreed. He was impressed, and he agreed to support this venture. So Van Hildebrand moved to Vienna, and for the next almost 5 years, he launched what became the premier journal of ideas in the battle against National Socialism, and he lived in constant danger of assassination. You know, the Austrian Nazis were in communication with the Nazis in Berlin, and there were attempts on various people's lives, and Van Hildebrand was frequently warned of plots against him, and yet he lived in complete peace and tranquility, which remains somehow unimaginable to me as a sort of nervous, I'm an Austrian. Austrians aren't supposed to be nervous, but nevertheless, it's quite extraordinary. The sense of the respect in which he felt that God was simply protecting him, and even if God would ask him to die or to lose his life in the process, there was somehow the feeling that it didn't matter because he was acting within the providence of God. So when I was preparing the book's epigraph, which contained 3 quotations, I wanted to do a kind of triptych of testimonies from people who captured the effectiveness of Hildebrand's witness. It's one thing to be principled, it's another thing to have an impact. And there were 2 that strike me quite especially. I'll read them to you quickly in conclusion. There's one that I'm sure you'll take some delight in, which is the exasperation of Franz von Papen, who was then the German ambassador to Austria, and he fumed actually to Hildebrand's brother-in-law, no less. He says, "That damned Hildebrand is the worst obstacle to National Socialism in Austria. No one does more harm." So, of course, a great feather in Van Hildebrand's cap. But back to the theme of witness, and back to what Helmut Kohl said at the beginning, I think the most beautiful testimony to Van Hildebrand's impact comes from his students. And there was a student by the name of Paul Stöcklein, a student of literature, in fact, who had this to say, and I'll leave you with this. He said, "Van Hildebrand immunized us and protected us from the philosophical waves that swept across Germany in those days. Heidegger's melodies," Heidegger being the great Nazi philosopher, "no longer had any power to seduce us, for our ears had become more discerning. Whoever understood Van Hildebrand was saved. I think one can rightly say that history might have been quite different had there been more professors like him."
Germany. And I think we all have to understand that God speaks to us individually, that you cannot make, there's certain things that are rules for everyone, right? The Decalogue, a number of other things like that. But if God is a person and he wants to have a personal relationship with us, he speaks to us individually and he leads us individually. And he led, it seems to me clearly, Dietrich von Hildebrand to leave Germany, to be a different kind of witness, to fight from outside, but equally inspiring. His love of beauty, of truth, of art, I see parallels with Bonhoeffer as well, and I think that at a time when it's tempting in our secular culture for people to look at Christians as not so smart, not so sensitive, not so aesthetically inclined, to look at examples like von Hildebrand and Bonhoeffer, and to see that these were men of great learning and great artistic sensitivity. I think it's important for us to understand that that's part of truth and part of who God is, and God doesn't want us to throw that by the wayside.
Together like so beautifully, like this heart which is true and burns with the light of truth, like the heart of he who is the truth, but also it's a heart which like loves and burns with love, and it's a heart which is given and vulnerable. And I just think like there's like the answer, the remedy, the way, the truth, and the life is found in the Sacred Heart. And in the church we always have this approach of both like confidence and security, but also compassion and zeal, and both truth and love. And all of this is found so beautifully in Jesus's most sacred heart. So much of the struggle and the tension that come about in the conflict in the culture in this month is different ways in which these are trying to be pulled apart and to be separated. And where love is being pitted against truth, and where truth is pitted against love, or where love is being exalted without truth, or, and this is something we have to pay attention to, where truth is being communicated without love. An initial proposal on just how to like what this means and how do we keep these integrated and how do we keep these one and how do we, what God has made one, how do we not pull asunder? There's an encyclical by Pope Benedict the 16th called Caritas in Veritate on truth and love. And it's real work to read it, like it's a real document, but he just so beautifully like reminds us of the unity between these two and the relationship between these two and the struggles we get in if they're divorced from one another. And so the first proposal is just, and it's free. You can find it online, Caritas in Veritate, right? Just Pope Benedict the 16th encyclical on love and truth. It's just really good. Basically, it talks about like love without truth. It's fickle, it's sentimental, like it's empty, and in the long run, it's even harmful.
No guilt, no shame! One baseball player who spoke out strongly was Trevor Williams of the Washington Nationals. He took to Twitter to condemn the LA Dodgers' decision to honor the group that he says is deeply offensive to his faith. His statement quickly went viral.
And Trevor Williams joined that as well, pitcher for the Nats.
Trevor Williams.
I hope that Trevor Williams is ready for the backlash.
I mean, that is a courageous statement by Trevor Williams.
And now, for the first time, he sits down for an on-camera interview to explain how he believes they are making a mockery of his faith and why they should not be awarded. Trevor Williams, great to meet you, and thank you so much for doing this interview.
Good meeting you as well. Thank you.
Your tweet that went viral all over the world, almost 20 million views. It's a long statement, but I'll just read a short piece from it now. You said, as a devout Catholic, I am deeply troubled by the Dodgers' decision to re-invite and honor the group, the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence, at their Pride Night. To invite and honor a group that makes a blatant and deeply offensive mockery of my religion and the religion of over 4 million people in the Los Angeles County alone undermines the values of respect and inclusivity that should be upheld by any organization. And like I said, that's been read 19 million times. Trevor, why did you feel so strongly that you wanted to make that statement?
It had to be said. We cannot stand idly by while our Lord gets mocked.
When you speak about the backlash and having courage to do this, most of the people, if you read through the comments, are supporting you. But then there are those who are saying things like homophobic and transphobic, and you just have a problem with that, the LGBT group. First of all, what do you say to those accusations?
I didn't say anything anti-pride in my statement. I tried to be as charitable as possible. I truly just wanted to point out the hypocrisy that the Dodgers Code of Conduct says you cannot make fun of a group, yet we're honoring this group at the expense of making fun of this group.
Yeah, so your issues with the mockery they're making of your faith.
Correct. And the mockery of it, and then the Dodgers not following their own rules. So that was truly my statement. If you read into it any other way, that's on you. But
were you afraid of the possible ramifications of being cancelled? We see people lose everything over a tweet or an opinion that they put online. You were putting your neck out there when a lot of other players are not. Were you worried?
I wasn't necessarily worried, because this is something that I believe is truth, right? And it's something that this is Trevor the Catholic man tweeting this. What I did, I believed was true, and I had to stick up for our truth. And at the end of the day, baseball is important, and it's given me a lot of tremendous opportunities. It's a privilege to play this game, and I'm thankful for everyone who's given me an opportunity. But when I die, hopefully in a state of grace, and St. Peter greets me at the gates, he's not going to ask what your win-loss record was in 2023. He's just going to, how did you build the kingdom of heaven? And being in a position like this, being a Major League Baseball player, and my religion being mocked in the realm of Major League Baseball, it only made sense to stick up for my truth.
You said that people were coming up to you in the street or in the baseball stadium saying, well done. And what about your teammates, your peers?
I've had really good conversations with teammates about this. Again, people thanking me, teammates thanking me for what I could be done, what I did. It's something that most people and most players are supportive of.
What would you say to people, Trevor, who are Catholics, they might not call themselves devout Catholics, but they're fans of the LA Dodgers. They love going to the games. They just want to watch the games. They don't want to get involved in all that. They see it as an argument happening for other people somewhere else. But they're still Catholics. Maybe they go to Mass every Sunday. They find themselves in a bind.
Sure.
They want to keep supporting their team. They like their faith. They like their church. What do they do?
I think it's a valid question, and it's something that a lot of families and individuals are going to have over the next, hopefully, weeks, months. But that's the point of a statement like this, is to start the conversation. It starts with not attending that game. It starts with potentially reconsidering where you put your dollars. I think there is a longing for truth. I think everyone has that desire to find truth, and I've noticed it in locker rooms in my entire life, in clubhouses my entire life, being with teammates of the same age or similar ages. There is a desire for truth, and that desire comes from within, from someone who loves you immensely. And you are loved more than you can imagine or more than you know. And that inkling of truth that you want to go seek and find is out there, and it's within Christ and his church.
Hey, Trevor, great meeting you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.